Okay, I'm Ray Tomasso. I'm a 1979 MFA graduate of the University of Colorado. Um, Colorado was my fourth grad school. I basically went back to graduate school for the purpose of teaching myself how to make paper. I was working with letterpress printers at the time and a bookbinder, thus the large book at the library. And our costs were going to be prohibitive in relationship to paper, because the first book was going to cost us about $5,000 in cost of buying the paper. And if you're going to design a book, design the type to fit the book, it was just another step to design the paper and make the paper. When I was at Michigan State in graduate school, they had a visiting artist, Garner Tullis, out of Santa Cruz, who within about 5 minutes explained to me how to make paper and the processes that were involved and what I wanted to do. I had read a book in '68 and attempted to make paper in '68, and it did not work at all. I saw nothing that even looked like paper. It said you started with rags and you beat them. So I took 2 rocks and I beat this piece of rag, and 15 minutes later it was still a rag, you know, nothing had happened. So basically, after his explanation at my third graduate school, the technique was to do tamarin prints, which were bleed lithography. So you were always having tear strips from bleed lithography. I was in the ceramics lab doing three-dimensional embossments of space and raku clay, and noticed there was a dough mixer. I took the dough mixer, the strips of paper, and an office shredder in the office of the art department, and basically shredded the paper, put it in the dough mixer, made pulp, and did my first castings. The problem was it was 30 miles outside of St. Louis. The piece took 2 weeks to dry with fans on it. You know, it didn't look like a direct method to anything. When I was at CU with the low humidity, pieces would actually, that were 4 foot by 6 foot by 10 foot would dry overnight, which gave you a lot of time to make new work in a short period. So I taught myself how to make paper, reading the literature that was available at the library, doing constant research, and basically, you know, I attended a conference in San Francisco, realized that my second year into it, that what I really needed was a Hollander beater opposed to this 20-year-old garbage disposal that would eat 1-inch squares of blue jean and spit them out. So I had a Hollander built for me and went on to get really serious about making paper. After graduating from CU, I taught at Ohio University. I taught graphic design and illustration. The problem with Ohio University was Athens, Ohio was just as wet as St. Louis, and once again it took 2 weeks for a piece to dry. So after a year there, I moved back to Colorado and concentrated on making paper from 1980 on. The end product of this was I went to Düren, West Germany in 1986 and helped found the International Association of Hand Papermakers and Paper Artists. Became a founding board member, the first vice president, and the second president of the organization, which was to promote the transfer of information and technology from across the world, people that were making paper in Asia, people that were making paper in Europe, so that we all had the same resources. At the time, Asia had the Asian papermaking technology, and that was their tradition. Europe had the European technology and apprenticeship programs and those traditions. And America at the time had the new technology, the influx, without any hindrance or repression of tradition. Not having a tradition, it allowed us to expand. And that's what happened in my work. I got into casting large pieces because I didn't know that you couldn't do it, or hadn't been told that I couldn't do it. And it was much easier to make large sheets than it was, smaller sheets. And then there was the technical aspect of it, that if you're a potter and a ceramic artist, that you should be able to have the technical knowledge and ability and technique to make a dinner set. Every plate, the same weight, the same diameter, and the same thing with every cup. You should be able to make a place setting of everything being the same. And if you're a paper maker, you should be able to make 200 sheets that weigh the same, have the same thickness, the same density. So it's just carrying on the tradition of the technical aspect, which is represented by the paper behind me and the show at the university, which represents the other side, the sculptural side. And the sculptural technique is basically the technology of the 19th century. Starting in the late 1700s, paper became the plastic of the day. They made carriage bodies out of it for their carriages, which is the same theory as making fiberglass Corvettes. You had a better weight to horsepower ratio. You could make things more dimensional because the only other technology you had was cast iron or wood. Wood being very heavy, but not as heavy as cast iron. Cast iron has limitations because it's brittle and doesn't work well under a lot of repeated blows to it. So they made railroad wheels out of wheat paste and paper, gluing them up into large discs, putting them on a lathe, turning them to make them round, boring a steel hub. So they would then paint them after they were dry, put a steel hub in them, band them like a wagon wheel, paint them, put plates on them, and put steel bolts through them, and they would last for 300,000 miles, up until they got higher speed trains, which the cast iron wheels wouldn't do. They made boats, steamboats, out of paper. They made building materials out of paper. In the 1850s, they had a song, The World of Paper, because people were wearing paper clothing. They had paper collars, paper cuffs, they had paper hats. Basically, you had the cellulose cuffs, so you only had to do your laundry once in a great while. You just pull off the collars and the cuffs, and you had a clean shirt, kind of. But, things in those days were more aromatic than they are today, so that was what happened. The building technique of using paper continues in wallboard, in tar paper for roofing material. For mica is just paper and glue. So it still continues. Paper plays part of the Industrial Revolution. One year, the racing sculls used by Yale and Harvard were the same manufacturer. They were huge sheets of linen paper coming off the machine that wrapped the skeleton of the boats, and the same manufacturer manufactured both boats for both universities at the time. So it was just an amount of skill of the individuals that year. I was a printmaker as an undergraduate, and I did a trip to Iowa City, and I saw an intaglio print that was printed on a piece of paper that was a 1/2 inch thick and had a 1-inch embossment in the piece. I immediately became dissatisfied with regular intaglio or etching processes where the surface was, very shallow, very deep, and started investigating how to make a piece of paper that was that thick and could take that kind of an embossment. Basically, this is a book, Papermaking, the History and Technique of an Ancient Craft by Dard Hunter. He did, his father owned a newspaper in Chillicothe, Ohio, so he had a background in printmaking, letterpress printing basically, and bookbinding. He traveled with his brother who was a magician, so they did the carnival acts. And then he went to Roycroft and designed stained glass windows at Roycroft, designed many of the little signature pieces, type styles for Roycroft, set books, and did graphic design for them. He applied to an institute in Vienna to study graphic design. They said he didn't have this classwork that he needed, so he went back home and got out a piece of parchment and engraved, did all the calligraphy for the stuff, all the gold work, all the, over the top, took it back the next year and applied, and they say, oh yeah, you got a diploma, great. So he studied graphic design in Vienna, and then he worked as a graphic designer in London. At the same time, on his weekends, his days off, he would go to the local paper mill. He ended up buying a paper mill and all the machinery and having it shipped to the United States. He set up a little hand mill in New York in the teens to produce paper for artists and for his own production. He also designed his own type so that he then cut the punches and cast his type. He had a letterpress. He made the paper. And when he was composing his books, he used his notes. And from his notes, he composed the book on the composing stick from his notes with his own type, and he hand printed his own books. The only thing he didn't do was bind them. So there's a whole series of books and photographs that he took with photogravure prints published in the 20s and the 30s of his travels around the world. This was a culmination in '47 of this book, and then later on, My Life with Paper, and several other books. Carried on by his son, which documented his life work and all the paper that he made and his work at Roycroft.